Shannon Howard had the theory that humanity was some sort of immensely intelligent macroorganism, that every person alive was connected to the other in an indescribable way, and humanity as a whole would always find its way back to peace, harmony, and a perfect balance. Sitting at the head of the latest meeting of the ICO, the Interplanetary Communities Organization, she's not so sure of her own personal theory. When she was younger, Shannon was never very interested in politics, but 20 years of outstanding academic performance and impeccable social skills landed her an internship at the Interplanetary Communities Organization. She worked tirelessly, training after high-ranking politicians across the 5 planets where humans resided, occasionally visiting numerous space stations and even trying out new ships of titanic dimensions as part of the crew of the then president of the ICO. It was to be expected that she landed a distinguished position at the ICO offices in Cardinal, the largest and most politically significant planet of the 5. What came as a surprise to many was the speed and ease with which Shannon managed to climb the ranks of the organization toward the presidency. She was among the youngest people to ever lead the organization, the youngest woman for sure. She was aware of her leadership, administrative, and social talents, and she took great pride in them. Not everyone at Cardinal supported her. What earned her the position was the loyal and enthusiastic support of the other planets. Since her days at the internship, she continued visiting all of them. Despite the ongoing conflict between Terra and Gia, 2 planets at war for longer than Shannon had been alive, she was there, mediating between them. Even while the Link, a notoriously self-sufficient planet, protested against the Interplanetary Communities Organization with the intent of parting ways with the main institution that kept all of humanity still connected, she was there, settling an agreement. And she was never forgotten in Suter, the planet where she was born. And now that she had such a prestigious title, was beloved as something close to a god. Her travels and her job meant that Shannon was acutely aware of the ever-present troubles that plagued humanity. Missiles from one planet to the other, missing contact with the space station, another strike in the Link, dozens of spaceships sending emergency signals every month, natural disasters in her home planet, discovering new diseases every year, and never enough cures. No matter how hard she tried, it seemed impossible to have humanity stand still and be at peace with itself for even just 1 second. Shannon thought that humanity hadn't been able to achieve any real stability and union since everyone lived together on Earth, almost 500 years ago. People started fleeing the rapidly deteriorating planet during the 21st century. And since then, they explored the universe to the best of their abilities, moving further and further away from home every century, leaving countless planets, ships, and stations behind like a trail of their achievements and failures. And then somehow, everything led them there. The latest meeting of the Interplanetary Communities Organization. Shannon Howard, president of the organization, listened with thinly veiled surprise as her vice president, Devin Fitzgerald, presented in front of the top panel of supervisors an idea that she had only heard faint rumors and offhand comments about. Repopulating planet Earth, Devin said, basking in the stunned silence that followed his words. Let us not waste time calling it anything but what it should be. Planet Earth was officially abandoned at the beginning of the 22nd century, but it has been recovering from humanity's past mistakes for many years now. It was deemed habitable over 100 years ago, and we haven't yet done anything about it. We are capable and prepared to perform all the necessary stages of research, testing, preliminary campsites, and eventually a settlement. It will be the most ambitious mission of the 26th century. Naturally, the room filled with ripples of uneasy whispers. But Shannon had the experience to identify the current of excitement and curiosity, rather than dread and skepticism that filled the air. It was the supervisor of economic affairs of the organization who spoke up first. As expected, she presented Shannon with a look of distress and a list of complaints. But she was level-headed and loyal, so Shannon listened. President Howard, with all due respect to the Vice President, I'm not quite sure we have the means to attempt to populate another planet, regardless of which one it is. Regardless of our technological capabilities, the ICO is barely keeping itself together, managing 5 planets. We can't let you appear vulnerable and distracted by a project of such colossal proportions when I believe Shannon is exactly the president the organization needs to carry out this mission, Devon interrupted the supervisor. He had a confident smile and a glimmer in his eye when he looked up at Shannon and said, This idea is an opportunity for all the planets to come together and collaborate in a way they haven't done since our great-grandparents lived. The overpopulation, the tensions in the market, the threats of invasion, it can all be redirected in one direction, all under President Shannon's #1 commitment to our people. Unity, balance, harmony. What better way to bring that promise to life than going back home for once and for all? Another silence followed. It was certainly going to be a polemical subject, but everyone could feel the change in the air. It was almost settled. Shannon was going to attempt the impossible. She was going to lead the mission that after 400 years would put human beings back on the surface of planet Earth. 7 months later, as unbelievable as it sounded, Shannon Howard was getting ready to step on planet Earth for the first time in her life. The process that led her there was long and complicated, but not nearly as troubling as she had anticipated. The most difficult part was getting the project approved, because some of her closest counselors and supervisors of the ICO were extremely reluctant. But once the mission to repopulate Earth was approved, everything started going smoothly. Shannon personally reviewed all the results next to her vice president, who she appointed as chief of this operation. It took 2 months to go to Earth and return to Cardinal, where she worked at the Interplanetary Communities Organization headquarters. They sent 3 ships to evaluate the conditions of the planet, determine an ideal location, and prepare as much as they could before the landing of the first provisional camp that would evolve into a settlement and someday a brand new city. The fact that everything went according to plan and the results of the first stages of the project were thoroughly successful felt like a really good sign. Shannon's only hesitation was leaving the ICO for 2 months so she could be on the ship that would land on Earth to inaugurate the first camp. But after making a career out of traveling wherever in the universe she was needed, she couldn't miss this historic moment, could she? Well, finally, after a month of traveling on the most luxurious ship the organization had to offer, Shannon landed on planet Earth. She was accompanied by Devon, her vice president and leader of this project, the small team he personally selected to carry out this important mission, and about 200 passengers, the most brilliant and hardworking minds society could offer to this extraordinary cause. They were making history right then and there. Shannon could feel her heart swell in her chest. It was the most important moment of her career, of her entire life, and nothing could describe the feeling she experienced when the gates of the ship opened and she saw it for the first time. Planet Earth in all its renewed splendor. It was going to be perfect. Or so she thought. The cameras were on her. All of humanity was holding their breath. Hundreds of years led to this moment. And finally, Shannon took the first step on the surface of the planet. One step, and then another, taking everything in. She felt Devin approach her. "Congratulations, Shannon. You did it," Devin said to her, placing a hand on her right shoulder. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied. It was the absolute truth. He had shouldered most of the work, and it definitely paid off. "And I couldn't have done it without you. Your blind trust in me and your foolish trust in humanity," he said. That was when Shannon finally tried to turn around. But Devin tightened his hold on her shoulder, and she heard the click of the guns pointed at her head. All at once, the fantasy broke. The cruel, dark, and twisted reality started to seep in and drag her down mercilessly. Beside her, Devin cleared his throat. But nothing could have made him look ashamed or apologetic. He was so proud of himself. "Part of me is disappointed you didn't even suspect this was a hoax." "Nothing. You really made it so easy for me." He goaded like an idiot, while his team of traitors watched from the gates of the spaceship, and his guards aimed their guns at Shannon. "You really thought I wanted the best for you and everyone in the universe, and that I was going to do this so you could go down in history and everyone would live in peace and love, or whatever it is you thought?" "So what?" Shannon spoke up, with her head held high, and through the lump in her throat. "You wasted all that time and money just to take me down and become president. You could have stabbed me in the back and killed me any day that you spent sleeping on your desk. You absolute coward, disgusting traitor, idiotic, shut the fuck up," he interrupted her. "I don't have to listen to you ever again. This is about me. I'm the one going down in history. I'm the face of the revolution now. I'm the new president of the ICO, the most powerful man in the universe, the hero that exiled you because you were a parasite using the resources of our worlds for peace instead of progress. And you're taking with you every other dirty criminal that was wasting our resources while rotting in prison. 2 birds, 1 stone, and I'm the hero of the whole story." "Wait, what?" Shannon did a double take, and finally turned around in time to see another pair of gates of the ship open up, while the passengers got shoved outside. Those weren't the scientists and volunteers meant to rebuild planet Earth. Those people were dressed as inmates from the prisons back home. Devin took his hand back from Shannon's shoulder with a grimace of disgust and started walking back to the ship, while his guards made sure to keep their guns aimed at Shannon so she wouldn't dare make a move. Then Devin, now president of the ICO through an act of treason, spoke to her one last time Have fun on Earth, Shannon. I hear it's a wild place, where only the strongest will survive. And you look like nothing but easy prey right now. If I were you, I'd start running." Shannon didn't move a muscle. She stayed there, alone, in that mostly deserted land, and she watched as the gates closed and the ship prepared for takeoff. It felt as if time stopped, and in a way, it kind of did. It was the end. With that ship taking off, and no means of communication from Earth to the other planets, this was the end for Shannon. She wanted to cry. More than anything, she wanted to scream and fight back and try to reason with the traitor. But they were gone. All her hopes were gone. She tightened her hands into fists, tight enough for her nails to dig into the palms of her hands. She had to ground herself, and she had no time to lose. She took a deep breath and roughly wiped away a stray tear. And then she looked around her. It was a barren land, with grayish skies and some hills in the distance. There were a couple of ancient abandoned buildings and satellites in the ruins scattered around. To her left, there was a pathetic attempt at a research campsite, which the traders must have built during the trips to make it barely realistic enough to fool her. But it was something. And then there were the few hundred people that the ship dumped in exile along with her. Inmates, Shannon remembered. Devon pulled them out of the prisoners back home and dropped Shannon in the middle of them, undoubtedly hoping they would tear her to pieces. She faced them, studied them for a moment, and then slowly started walking toward them. Shannon noticed that some of them started running away from the group as soon as they were free. Some immediately drifted into smaller groups, and after the ship took off, a handful of them also started walking toward her. It was difficult to gauge their emotions as they looked at her. She didn't recognize any face staring back at her until a moment of recognition hit her. One of them was a serial killer that was caught just a couple of years ago. She'd personally announced to the population the good news that he would be locked away forever. All at once, she recognized a face or two more, but her brain convinced her that they were all the same. Faces she'd only seen on official files. Strangers whose life sentences in prison she'd personally signed. Over 100 violent and dangerous people with good reason to have a personal vendetta against her. Slowly, Shannon moved up her hands in front of her to signal she was coming in peace. She raised her voice to breach the small distance still separating her from the large group, and she said, "I just want to talk. We're going to need each other if we want to survive here. I think..." "Oh, no. One of the men interrupted her in a mocking tone. He was tall and muscular, with a bald head and a fiery frown on his face. His face was familiar. He was probably famous, but at the moment Shannon couldn't remember which despicable act had put him in prison. "I recognize you, Madam President," he said. "You have no power or authority here. If anything, you're lesser than the rest of us. You're different. Weak. Completely alone." Shannon gritted her teeth and hoped she wasn't visibly shaking. She was starting to sweat, and her heart was beating wildly in her chest. She'd never felt so lost and scared in all her life. Before that man could continue talking, the one beside him, the infamous serial killer, took a single jump forward so suddenly and with such a wicked smile that Shannon couldn't help but flinch and take a step backward. A wave of cruel laughter moved through the group that watched her every move like hawks. Shannon tried to regain her composure, but a couple of other men imitated the first, trying to scare her. The laughter continued. The group was restless, and Shannon was sentenced to death. Then the men started running toward her. She couldn't believe she was about to take Devon's advice, but she had no other option. She started running for her life. There was no time to hesitate or to try anything else. One look over her shoulder confirmed her greatest fear. A large group of people stepped away from the larger crowd to chase after her. They were fast. They were smiling. And unlike Shannon, it probably wasn't the first time they were in such a situation. The most horrible scenarios were running through her mind. She tried to remember every name and every face that she saw in a file that she signed to send someone to a life sentence in jail. Murderers, rapists, abusers, terrorists, any and all kinds of vile and dangerous humans in the universe. And they were currently chasing her through the deserted surface of an abandoned planet. Shannon made her way to that camp setup that was in the middle of nowhere to fool her into believing this was a real project. She hoped to find anything that would help her, but she didn't even know what that would be. A weapon? She couldn't picture herself turning around and shooting at the rabid crowd. A way to call for help. It would take a full month before anyone from the other planets could reach Earth. She was doomed. The camp turned out to be useless. It still looked fully functional. There might be essentials for survival like food, tools, and medical equipment, but nothing that would save her from an angry mob. She kept running, the feet hitting the brown soil desperately, the wind on her face, the unfamiliar air burning in her lungs. And then, something hit her. The people chasing her started to pick up rocks and throw them at her. She tried to move away. She tried to lose them, but there was nowhere to hide. She couldn't run much longer. And finally, one of the rocks hit her back hard enough to make her lose her balance and stumble. The first man that jumped at her was the serial killer that she'd spotted in the crowd. He straddled her helpless body. But miraculously, he hesitated. He was smiling wickedly, salivating, and his eyes were bloodshot. There was something deeply wrong with him. But he'd always killed with some kind of weapon, and before he could figure out how to hurt her for his own pleasure, Shannon was able to kick him away from her. It was an extremely short-lived victory. She didn't even get to stand up before another person was able to capture her. And this one didn't get to do more than meet her eyes before someone else pushed him off of her. The next one was a woman, and she didn't hesitate. She yelled and scratched at Shannon's face like her life depended on it. And then came another, and another. They were fighting each other for a chance to get Shannon underneath them. She fought as best as she could. She kicked and screamed and punched and even bit at everything that came her way. But she was helpless, outnumbered, and absolutely lost. The people started fighting each other around her like animals. Their rage and sudden freedom blinded them. Nobody cared who they were hurting anymore, and they didn't need a reason. There was a man on top of Shannon, with his hands wrapped tightly around her throat. Shannon had endured punches, kicks, scratches, and more as she was held to the ground. But for the first time, it looked like she was really going to die. Her odds were so terrible that she would be glad if she died right then and there, less than an hour into that merciless torture. Her chest was burning. She couldn't keep her eyes open anymore. She stopped trying to fight him off. And then a different person knocked him off of her. The air rushed back into Shannon's lungs with a vengeance. She was trembling and crying, but she didn't exactly make a move to get up and try to escape. She knew what was next. Another killer. Another criminal. Anyone taking their chance at killing her. Except, this time strange hands grabbed her arms and pulled her up. Come on, you have to get up, this person told her. But Shannon was barely trying. Come on, I'm getting you out of here, the stranger insisted, and Shannon finally regained some semblance of stability. She stumbled to her feet. She let the stranger carry her away from the pile of bodies attacking each other. They had to dodge several attacks, step on dead bodies, and fall on dirty puddles of mud mixed up with fresh blood, but eventually they made it. Shannon looked behind her and saw pure and absolute chaos. Strangers were fighting each other and barely anyone noticed she'd gotten away. I have to do something, she said, still gasping for air. I have to say something to stop this. The stranger laughed. Don't bother. Diplomacy doesn't matter on Earth anymore, he said. Why did you help me? Shannon wondered as she did her best to walk away on her trembling legs. This time when the stranger laughed, it sent chills down Shannon's body. Oh, this isn't help, he said coldly and with a deadly smile. I'm not an amateur like them. I think any and all politicians deserve to experience long and thorough torture before their final breath. You're not the worst of them, but you'll have to do. Shannon frowned and gulped nervously, but there was also a spark of anger unlike anything she'd ever experienced before. She was fooled and betrayed and transported across the universe directly into a trap. She was chased through an abandoned planet, beaten by people she'd never met before, and if she could, she would kill the man standing in front of her at that moment. Just when Shannon was preparing to truly fight for her life, tooth and nail, someone else knocked down the stranger. She flinched back and expected the worst. But she was met for the first time with friendly and familiar faces staring back at her. A young woman and her father. Two figures of a failed rebellion in Suter, Shannon's home planet. She tried to settle an agreement with them, but when they refused, the ICO demanded they join the long list of political prisoners. Madam President, it's such a pleasure to see you again, said the young woman named Erica Garcia. If you'd like to live, I suggest you come with us. When she noticed Shannon's hesitation, she added, I swear, there are no hidden motives. We're trying to find some order here, and we need you. Please. Everything looked like a trap, but Shannon really didn't have any better options at the moment. So she nodded. She accepted Erica's help and leaned on her as Erica's father led them away from the crowd and inside one of the abandoned buildings underneath a large and broken antenna. Once inside, the first look at the place was very confusing for Shannon. There was a man that talked to her as soon as their ship left. There were a couple of people tending to their wounds on the floor, and she recognized a handful of people from back home. More political prisoners. Some kind of celebrity accused of fraud, even some that couldn't have been older than 18. What's going on here? Shannon wondered, and relied on Erica's steady hand to guide her to a sitting position on the floor, so she could also receive some help on her many wounds. A new beginning. A tall and intimidating man with a gray voice addressed Shannon once again. She was too tired to be scared now. His name is Adam, Erica explained quietly to Shannon as she prepared a first aid kit they took from the camp to help her. He was a sort of leader in the prison. People listen to him. Well, they're scared of him. He can run a prison, but we've convinced him that he has no idea how to rebuild a planet. Adam stepped closer to Shannon, and for the first time she saw his expression soften into something other than hostility. Everyone on the planet with a functioning brain is in this room, and even though you put them behind bars, they seem to trust your official and democratic ass more than me. The people out there, they are animals. They are worthless, and we'll be lucky if most of them die in that fight, he said. He must have noticed Shannon's instinct to fight back at his crude words, but he went on sharply. Don't try to defend them, unless you're going to go out there and break up the fight. Are you going to work for me or not? There was a tense pause. Everyone was staring at Shannon. This was nothing like being elected president of the Interplanetary Communities Organization. This was somehow much more important. Fuck the fate of the universe, Shannon thought. All that mattered to her now was planet Earth, and she'd make it her own and make things right this time. She reached out for Erica, deciding all at once to trust her, and used her help to stand back up. We can work together, Shannon said, holding her head high and meeting Adam's eyes. I don't think you're in a position to make requests, he frowned. It wasn't a request, Shannon replied. It was a demand. She didn't expect him to laugh at her, but it must have been a satisfied laugh. Her boldness amused him, because a second later, he was shaking her hand and sealing the deal. Shannon used to be the greatest representative of humanity and the civilized world. Adam used to lead a reign of intimidation and immoral deals in prison. Together, they were going to raise life on planet Earth once again. People listened to Shannon out of respect, and Adam out of fear. They stopped fighting when he yelled at them, and they stood in line for food when she told them to. They worked on cleaning spaces to live when he ordered them, and they followed instructions for survival that she gave them. They made homes in abandoned buildings, planted seeds brought from other planets, and occasionally killed each other in cold blood, and attempted to assassinate their leaders, who worked harder than anyone else to prove themselves and maintain order and trust around them. In a few weeks, they had a decent campsite. In a few months, the old wounds were scars. Shannon and Adam worked together seamlessly, and one day the whole community was shocked to see a spaceship approaching the planet. What's that? Erica asked Shannon, reaching out for her, overwhelmed by fear, confusion, and hope, just as everyone else. Some kind of humanitarian help, if I had to guess, Shannon replied. I'm sure Devin must have received a lot of backlash back home for what he did, and this is his embarrassing attempt at making up for it. Don't get your hopes up, Erica. I need you by my side. Shannon was right. The ship landed, and when the gates opened, the first thing everyone saw was a group of guards pointing their guns at them. They were probably expecting a few dozen people completely turned wild and uncivilized. Instead, they met a well-organized community of all kinds of reformed criminals, redeemed individuals, and innocents freed at last. Still, the guards didn't talk a lot. They brought out several large containers of resources and supplies from the other planets, and if anyone got too close, the guns came back up. They seemed very surprised to see Shannon still alive, but they still delivered their instructions. Shannon Howard, former president of the ICO, was allowed to board the ship with one companion and return home. Everyone was gathering around her and moving in closer to hear her answer. She could feel everyone closest to her holding their breath. Finally, she said, "Thank you for the offer, but I must politely decline. Tell the ICO that I am already home." She paused. She stared at Adam's look of incredulity, Erica's warm smile, and all her new friends with mixed emotions in their eyes. "However," she added, "in my place, I'd like to send Adam Clark, my right-hand man, who's earned my respect and admiration and deserves a second chance at life." Adam's overjoyed laugh reminded Shannon of the way he laughed at her when they first met. She didn't get chills this time. She didn't fear him at all anymore. She watched him say goodbye to everyone. She gave him a firm hug when he approached her, and she smiled genuinely when she saw him get back in that ship, along with the guards that Devon had sent for her. She knew Adam even better than she'd known Devon. As the ship took off away from Earth, Shannon looked at Erica, her new right-hand woman, and she looked around at the community she proudly called family now. There were looks of relief, worry, and confusion among them. She knew exactly what each of them was thinking. Erica had told her everything. "I hope this serves as a lesson to each and every one of you," Shannon said. Her voice was firm, and after everything, it was a true miracle that her eyes hadn't lost their kindness. "I want all of you to know that I was betrayed once before. I can see the intention of treason in someone's eye and smell a traitor from a mile away. I knew I couldn't trust that ship, but I also knew Adam's plans to get rid of me here on Earth. I want to tell his supporters to abandon those plans immediately." Some people gasped in genuine shock, and a handful of them immediately ran away. But nobody on planet Earth missed the moment that the ship of so-called humanitarian help that was meant to take Shannon back home exploded into a million pieces in the sky above them. Among the screams and the uproar of the crowd, everyone still heard Shannon say, "I will never be betrayed again." Hey sci-fi horror fans, it's Teresa. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to give it a thumbs up. Craving another scary story? Click on that video on your screen. Until next time, everyone. And remember, stay cosmic.